This is the story. It all begins just over 10,000 years ago, deep within the fiery depths of the Minecraft Nether. Now, the Nether has always been a dimension filled with sorrow, sadness, and suffering. But no entities felt that more than the Ghasts, as they spent their sad, meaningless lives flying across those depressing lands, constantly crying out in sorrow, knowing that they were trapped here in this hell for all of eternity, and there was nothing that they could do about it. Well, that was until one day when everything would change for a select few Ghasts. As it was on that day that a portal suddenly opened up within a soul sand valley, and so as soon as that happened, all the Ghasts began to fly over to it to see what it was, as none of them had ever seen a portal before. However, before any of the Ghasts could get a proper view of that portal, a being emerged. It was a Steve, and that Steve, when he came out of that portal, got out a crossbow, and he began to shoot down the Ghasts with tipped arrows. Oh no, this was bad, very bad, as one hit from an arrow would kill any Ghast, and so, knowing that, they all began to fly away, fearing for their lives. However, that Steve was a skilled archer, and so for that reason, he was able to hit 3 Ghasts with those tipped arrows. Now, luckily, they were far enough from that Steve and his crossbow that most of the arrow's momentum had been lost by the time it hit them, and so for that reason, they all survived. However, that potion that those arrows were infused with caused all 3 of those Ghasts to fall down to the ground as their worlds went dark. Several hours passed when the 3 Ghasts finally regained consciousness. But when that happened, all the Ghasts were very confused, as they were no longer in the Nether. No, instead, they were in a new world. They could feel the difference in the air, and they were trapped in a small stone room. This was weird, and so the Ghasts began to look around this room to see if there was an escape. And very luckily, there was, as they saw a tunnel leading out of this small room. As well as that, they also saw the same portal that Steve had come from. This was great. And so all the Ghasts then began to try and fly over to that portal so that they could go home to the Nether. However, they couldn't move, as they were tied down to these strange minecarts. This was wrong. All wrong, as no Ghast was meant to be tied down to a minecart. They were meant to be free in the air. And so, because of that, one of the Ghasts tried to let out a fireball in an attempt to free himself from that minecart. However, as they were all in such a confined area, that fireball just hit him, and he died instantly. This both shocked and horrified the other 2 Ghasts, as they couldn't believe that anyone would restrict them like this. But also, at the same time, they knew that they wouldn't be able to fight back if that monstrous Steve ever came back to them, because they would just kill themselves just like that first Ghast. And so, for that reason, they were doomed. And unfortunately for them, just a few seconds later, that Steve ran into that tiny room, where he then just stared at them blankly. However, after a few hours, that Steve began to move, as he started to place down some rails leading out of that room and through to that tunnel. And then he walked over to one of the ghasts, and then he began to push that ghast, while still on that minecart, down those rails. Oh no, where was he going? He didn't have time to think, as he was going down that tunnel so fast until the tunnel began to shrink, and well, it was too small for the ghast to breathe in, and thus he began to suffocate. Now that Steve tried to save him, but he was too slow, and so that ghast died. Immediately after that, the Steve began to stare daggers at that final ghast, and he began to place more rails, connecting his minecart to that tunnel that had just killed the second ghast. Oh no, he was convinced that he was going to die now, and so he began to cry, preparing for death. But after a few minutes had passed, he realized that he wasn't dead, as that Steve hadn't pushed him yet. No, instead, that Steve was enlarging that tunnel so that it could fit him. Okay, maybe he was safe. And well, he was about to find out, as after a few hours, the Steve returned from that tunnel, and he walked over to that ghast, where he then began to push him. Now, that ghast was scared, as he just didn't know if he was going to survive, or even what was on the other end of that dark tunnel. However, after a few hours of travelling through that creepy, dark tunnel, he was finally let out into the light, and after a few minutes, he was released from that cart by the Steve. And so with that, he was set free into a giant glass room. It was beautiful, as there were flowers all over the place of all different colours, green grass covering the ground, a bright golden sun illuminating the structure, as well as thousands of entities inhabiting it. But those entities, unlike those from the Nether, were all very happy. And so, seeing this magical sight, that Ghast, for the first time ever, experienced joy. And so, he stopped crying. In fact, over the next few days, as that Ghast began to fly around that glass room, looking at all these beautiful beings, he developed a smile that he just couldn't get rid of. And his eyes began to open wide, as he began to take in all these amazing sights more clearly, and he just felt happy with life. He was really different now, as no Ghast was like this, and so for that reason, from that moment onwards, he became known as the Distorted Ghast, as his optimistic view of the world was just so distorted from all other Ghasts. And so the Distorted Ghast was just happy to be alive and in that palace of glass. And as the Steve had given him this amazing life, he was very grateful for him, and thus for that reason he spent a long part of his day just thanking him profusely. And so all was good over the next few years, as the Distorted Ghast spent his days flying around in that palace of glass, observing all these fascinating beings and thanking the Steve. It really was a very nice life. Well, that was until one rainy night when everything changed, as it was on that night that a storm consumed the world. But this was not just any random storm. No, this was a thunderstorm, and it was likely the worst thunderstorm that had ever hit the overworld. And so, for that reason, thousands of bolts of lightning began to hit the glass roof of that palace, which then caused hundreds of glass blocks to shatter, sending out millions of shards of deadly glass across the land. Now, seeing this danger, that Steve ordered the Distorted Ghast to get back into that minecart, as he promised to move him to safety, away from all those glass shards. And well, as that Ghast had full trust in the Steve, he did as he said. And together, they began to travel through that dark, gloomy tunnel once again. And so, as they went through that tunnel, getting deeper and deeper into the underground, getting further away from that storm, the Ghast and the Steve were safe. But after a while, they had returned to that small stone room. And so it was then that the Steve got out of his minecart and he was about to release the distorted Ghast from his as well, when out of the shadows came two creepers. However, the Steve didn't see either of them, and so one of them was able to get right behind him and explode, which killed him instantly, and that also pushed that Ghast along the tracks and forcefully pushed him into that portal, and thus he returned to the Nether. But the distorted Ghast was still trapped in that cart, and he couldn't get away as he needed the Steve to release him. And so, for that reason, he was unable to do anything when the other creeper followed him into the Nether and exploded. And so, as soon as that happened, the minecart broke and he fainted. Several months passed when he slowly regained consciousness. And when that happened, he realized that he was just lucky to be alive, as he had sustained serious damage. But still, he was healing, and he believed that he was going to be okay. And so it was then that he began to fly up, and was ready to go back to that portal, and return to that other world. But then he saw it. That creeper, when he exploded, had broken that portal beyond repair, and thus, the distorted Ghast was once again trapped in the Nether. Now, that sounds rather sad, being stuck there in that hell once again. But the distorted Ghast didn't see it like that. No, instead he saw this as an opportunity to share the good news to all the other Ghasts, that they didn't need to be so sad, as there was hope outside this hell, and that life was good, and that there was no need to be filled with sorrow all the time. And so the distorted Ghast was desperate to spread these messages, as he wanted to help his fellow Ghasts. And so with that, the distorted Ghast then began to fly over to the other Ghasts, where he then tried to explain to them the good news that he had learned. However, they don't care, as they were just too sad to listen, and they really just didn't want to improve their lives, as they were just too consumed in their victim mentality. And in fact, all the Ghasts just wanted to be sad. But still, none of this dissuaded the distorted Ghast, as he was still determined to change the lives of all Ghasts, even if that meant everyone hated him. He just had to try and save them. And so for that reason, he travelled the Nether, going everywhere, from warp forests to basalt deltas, to the Nether wastes, to the soul sand valleys, to the crimson forests, all so that he could tell millions of crying Ghasts his story. But still, none of them cared. And yet, despite all these rejections, the distorted Ghast was never sad, as nothing could make him upset anymore, as he was just too happy with his life, as he knew how good it was to be alive right now, even in the Nether. However, just as he had predicted, due to his persistence, many Ghasts began to hate him, and thus, for that reason, all the Ghasts just began to fly away whenever they heard that the distorted Ghast was coming to them. But still, even that didn't stop him, as now he just began to scream out to all other Ghasts, trying to spread the good news. And in fact, he was doing this so incredibly loud that some of the eardrums of other beings within the Nether began to burn or explode. But still, not a single Ghast ever came to him, as none of them wanted to improve. And thus, for that reason, the distorted Ghast became very isolated wherever he went, as no Ghasts wanted to reside anywhere near him. But still, once again, that didn't stop him, as now he just began to laugh wherever he flew, in the hopes that just one Ghast would be lured in by the happiness that he was presenting, and would be willing to accept his story. However, that never worked, and so he was all alone. Well, not for too long, as it was on one day while the distorted Ghast was just travelling through the nether, continuing to laugh, hoping to spread joy within the nether, that another portal had opened up. Now, it was quite a distance away, but he could hear it. This was amazing news for the distorted Ghast, and so for that reason, he began to fly over to it, to see if there was another one of those amazing Steves. And well, in just a few minutes, he arrived at that portal to see yet another Steve. And so the distorted Ghast was ecstatic, as that Steve that he saw originally was like a god to him. And so surely this Steve would be just like that as well. And so, thinking that, the distorted Ghast then began to fly over to him, just looking at him with love and excitement. And that Steve just stared back, standing peacefully by that portal. It was amazing. He couldn't wait to see what that Steve was going to do for him. But then that Steve jumped down from that portal as he then began to place down jack-o'-lanterns. That was weird. He had seen pumpkins before, but never lit up pumpkins. And so he decided to try and eat those lanterns. And well, he loved it, as it was just so sweet and sugary, and it reminded him of that other world. Now, that Steve that had just placed down that jack-o'-lantern was rather shocked to see this, as no Ghast was meant to be eating any jack-o'-lanterns, especially not some sort of weird smiling Ghast. And so for that reason, the Steve placed down another, thinking that it was just a mistake that that Ghast had eaten that lantern. However, the distorted Ghast ate that as well. Okay, that was weird, but it also gave that Steve an idea, as maybe he could lure this weird Ghast away using jack-o'-lanterns, and he could make him a decoration for his Halloween build. That was a smart idea. And thus, that Steve then began to place down a trail of pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns, luring the distorted Ghast over to his crimson build site, where he then placed a pile of those delicious jack-o'-lanterns within a cage. Now, the distorted Ghast was just excited to see so much food, and was just so grateful for that Steve giving it to him. And so for that reason, he just ran straight towards that pile, not realizing that this Steve was not a hero like the other one. No, instead, this Steve was selfish and evil, as that pile was in a cage. And so as soon as he was within that cage, the door was slammed shut and locked by that evil Steve. And so he was trapped. But before he could use his fireball ability to get out of it, a minecart fell from the sky and he was tied to it. Oh no, he was stuck now, and there was nothing he could do. And so for that reason, he became nothing more than just a Halloween decoration. Now, the distorted Ghast was horrified at this, as he couldn't believe that a godly Steve would do this. But still, despite that, he remained in a constant state of joy and happiness, as he had faith that this was all just temporary, and he was going to be freed very soon. However, once Halloween was over, that Steve just left him there, never returning. Now, this might seem like the time that the distorted Ghast would lose hope and would change to be just another one of those sad, crying, and suffering Ghasts. But no, he never lost the joy within his soul, and he was always smiling and was filled with constant hope. And luckily, one day, everything would change for him, as it was on one dark morning that he heard it. Wither sounds over and over and over again. Oh no, a wither was coming, and he couldn't do anything to defend himself. He was going to die. However, after a few minutes, he realized that he couldn't see the wither, even though the sounds were getting louder and louder, meaning the wither, by this point, should be very close to him, and thus, he should have been able to see it. But still, nothing. However, just a few seconds later, from the shadows came a new being. But it was not the wither, nor was it the Steve. No, instead, it was a strange, transparent humanoid being made from solidified, corrupt code. This was weird. But maybe this new being was his savior, and he was here to help. And so the distorted Ghast was just happy to see him, and so he began to laugh to get his attention. However, as soon as he began to laugh, that thing noticed the distorted Ghast, and then he began to lift up his right arm, and just seconds later, the distorted Ghast suffocated to death. So, who was that creature, and why did he just do that? Well, to find out, you'll need to watch this video.